Good morning and welcome back to the Word on the Streets Across the Universe stage. My name is Leah Bobet. I'm an editor, books reviewer, and author of the Aurora, Sunburst, and Copper Cylinder award-winning fantasy Inheritance of Ashes. It's my pleasure and privilege to be your host for today. So our next item is Imagination Architects, Building Worlds from Words. Adventure from and through underworlds, traversing planes of destruction and hope. Fonda Lee, Sienna, Tristen, and Kelly Robson will discuss the fantastical, intricate worlds they've built and the wars that go on inside them, both internally and externally. It's my pleasure to introduce your moderator, Derek Kunsken. Derek Kunsken left cancer research and eventually found himself working with refugees with the Canadian Foreign Service, but now he raises his son and writes science fiction in Gatineau. He won the Asimov Award, and his first novel was nominated for the Aurora, the Locust, and the Chinese Nebula Awards. Let's give it up for Derek, please.
Welcome to Imagination Architects, Building Worlds from Words, which is a tongue twister. We've got a great panel lined up. We've got a fantastic set of panelists. I'm about to introduce them. We will do a series of short readings, and after that we're going to get into a discussion. If time allows, we're going to get to audience questions, but I think everybody will agree that if things are going really awesome in the discussion, we don't want to interrupt it too much, and you can always catch them after the panel, getting them to sign a book or something. So I would like to introduce our panelists first. Fonda Lee is the World Fantasy Award-winning author of Jade City, and the award-winning YA science fiction novels Zero Boxer, EXO, and Crossfire. Born and raised in Canada, Lee is a black belt martial artist, a former corporate strategist, and an action movie aficionado who now lives in Portland, Oregon. Welcome, Fonda. Sienna Tristen is the author of the multiple award-winning fantasy novel The Heretic's Guide to Homecoming. She's also one half of the Shale Project, a multimedia storytelling initiative, roughly in the shape of a planet, dedicated to publishing healing and innovative fiction. Welcome, Sienna. And Kelly Robson's fiction has appeared in Asimov Science Fiction and Tor.com. Her novella, Waters of Versailles, won the 2016 Aurora Award, and she's also been a finalist for the Nebula Award, the World Fantasy Award, the Theodore Sturgeon Award, the Sunburst Award, and the Astounding Award for Best New Writer. And she lives in Toronto. Welcome, Kelly. It's an incredible panel. And what what I'd like to do now is each of the panelists is going to read for 2 to 3 minutes to give you a bit of a flavor of what is in their works. And I think we'll start with Fonda, and I'm going to describe briefly Jade War. The Call siblings battle rival clans for honor and control over an Asia-inspired fantasy metropolis in Jade War, the sequel to the World Fantasy Award-winning novel Jade City. Faced with threats on all sides, the Call family is forced to form new and dangerous alliances, confront enemies in the darkest streets and the tallest office towers, and put honor aside in order to do whatever it takes to ensure their own survival and that of the green bones of Kekon. So, Fonda, please.
Thanks, Derek. So I struggled to find a little passage to read that was not full of spoiler, because this is the second book in a trilogy. And the only thing you really need to know for this little section I'm going to read is that the trilogy takes place on this fictional island called Kekon, where there is a resource that is not found anywhere else in the world, and that is magic jade. And the jade is controlled by some powerful clans, and the story centers on one of the families that rule the family that rules one of the clans. Before she left Kekon to pursue a degree at Belfort Business School in Winton, Espenia, Shay had lived for 3 weeks in a room in the Tranquil Suites Hotel on Umont Island. Gerald had been discharged 2 months ago and was awaiting her back in his home country, and after the most recent screaming family argument, Shay could not bear to be around her grandfather and could not stand to look at her brother Hilo's face, so she packed her bags and moved out of the Call house. Lon was the only one to come see her the night before her departure. He took the ferry from John Loon and knocked on her hotel room door to offer to take her to dinner. Shay said she didn't care where they went, so Lon suggested a nearby noodle shop. After tomorrow, you'll be eating Espenian food, so let's have something homey tonight, he said. The restaurant was on the main thoroughfare of the port town, Neighboring bistros and bars had signs and menus written in Espanian, and on a pleasant summer evening, off-duty Espanian military personnel crowded the open-air patios and conversed loudly on the sidewalks. There were no lanterns hanging in the shop windows. Lon and Shay were not seated or served ahead of everyone else. Shay's flight was not until tomorrow, but she already felt as if she were in a different country. Lon did not seem irritated at not being recognized and saluted. As they waited for their meals, he took in the environs with thoughtful bemusement. I wouldn't be surprised, he said, if this is what the whole world looks like one day. An unrecognizable blend, cultures and people mixed together. Where will Jade and clans and green bones fit in, I wonder? That's for you to think about, not me. In retrospect, she'd been rude to her brother, but at the time her Jade was locked in a bank safe and she was still moody and ill from withdrawal. You should eat more, Lon said, when he saw that she hadn't finished the food in her bowl. You have a long, tiring trip ahead of you, and then you'll be alone in a foreign country. I won't be alone, Shay countered. I'll be with Gerald. Lon looked at her compassionately. We're always alone with our own decisions. Her brother had been Pillar for a year, and in that time he'd grown more somber and forthright, had seemed to age in a way that widened even the 9-year gap between them. You can make a rational, well-informed choice and still be unprepared for what it means. You're the youngest in the family, and a woman, and a call. And none of that makes life easy on K-Con. But in Espenia, you'll start out below everyone else. You'll have to fight for every scrap of respect that you're used to getting at home. Did Granda send you to make a final attempt at discouraging me? Shay asked. Lon's remonstrative stare made Shay avert her eyes. No, he said, coldly enough for her to feel ashamed. I've said that I support your decision, but I'm your older brother and the pillar of the clan, so that gives me enough extra life experience to tell you that no matter where you go, others will try to define you, unless you define yourself. I'm 24 years old, Lon, Shay said. I can take care of myself. I know you can, Lon said sadly. The waiter came to clear their dishes. A swollen orange moon was rippling in the narrow stretch of water that separated Yumon Island from the skyline of John Loon, which Shay would soon watch fade from her airplane window and not see again for 2 years. Just try not to forget who you are, her brother said.
Sienna is going to be reading from the Heretic's Guide to Homecoming, and the description is, ashamed of his past and overwhelmed by his future, Renoa Genoveva Elitzi Dena Ilanovani. So close. Feels too small for his name, as do I. He despairs of fulfilling his spiritual identity until he begins a cross-continental pilgrimage with an otherworldly mentor. 1 part fantasy travelogue, 1 part emotional underworld journey. The Heretic's Guide to Homecoming is a slow-burning story about stories and the way they shape our lives.
In case anyone does want to know how to pronounce the name was Ronoa Genoveva Elitzi Dene Romani, and it does feel like a bit of a tongue twister as well. I'm going to start right from the beginning with a myth. There's a couple of myths in this because it's a traveling story and we learn about people through their lore. So I'm going to start right from the beginning. It's about names. Speak of this to no one. Our little ones, the gods lamented, are cut from us like branches barely green. They wake on the earth and forget us, their wounds, their wishes. The shock of separation dislocates them from us, leaves them unmoored from their purpose, from the destiny they were spun for. They feel us no longer, and we all of us ache from the absence. If only they could take comfort in the land, spoke Enos, the orderly. They would find peace in the patient cradling of the ground beneath their feet, pull strength from its solidity, find us in their sense of the familiar. But they wander and forget the shape of their lands. They lose themselves and are unable to appease the craving for a place to belong. If only they could seek solace in each other, spoke Pao, the chaotic. Surely the bright thread of community could weave a blanket fit to warm their disquiet souls, could tighten the knots that tie them to us, the knots that have come so unraveled. But they know not how to communicate with one another. They bump into one another uncomprehending. They are alone together, incapable of offering each other support or encouragement. If only they could carry our memory with them, said Ege, the universe, from which all the gods and their little ones had sprung. All would be well if they remembered the divinities that gave them life, if they knew to whom their hearts belonged, if they recalled their glorious birthright. but their walls of skin and bone are too thick to reach through, a lonely prison of limb too crude for the subtleties of spirit to permeate, and they drift disconnected from all. And as our ancestors strayed across the deserts, bewildered and bereft without understanding why, the gods wept for the pieces of themselves they had unwittingly stranded in the material realm. Fret not, for I have a solution, spoke Genoveva, the daughter of power. I shall teach the little ones to speak as we do. I shall form the word from the fires of creation, and my brother the wind shall pass his breath across it to cool it for their tongues. I shall weave music into their throats, so that they might talk to one another as birds sing and the sand rustles and sighs. I shall bestow them each with words of their own, special words, magic talismans that will preserve the knowledge of which you have spoken. I shall give them with names, and the names shall be their lifelines. Said Enos the orderly, give them a name for the ground, for the lands they are born into, that they may return to their earthly home no matter how many times they depart. Said Powell the chaotic, give them a name for their families, for the human kin they are born from, that they may ford the rivers of their lineage no matter how many generations split the delta. Said Ege the universe, give them a name for us, their source and origin, the point of their departure and arrival, that they may sense the breath of the divine on their brows, and know us to be watching over them, no matter how many obstacles block the path to their purpose. Said Genoveva, these three I shall bestow. I shall give them a name for themselves, a way to distinguish from place and parentage and godling, for it is by this distinguishment that they will grow into their reason for being. I shall give them a name for themselves, that they may feel the spark of their own unbridled individuality and know themselves important, no matter the forces which may seek to persuade them otherwise. Make it so, exclaimed the gods. With pleasure, said grinning Genoveva. Behold, from language, life. And so it has been to this day.
Kelly's going to be reading from Gods, Monsters, and a Lucky Peach. Discover a shifting history of adventure as humanity clashes over whether to repair their ruined planet or luxuriate in a less tainted past. In 2267, Earth has just begun to recover from worldwide ecological disasters. Min is part of the generation that first moved back up to the surface of the Earth to reclaim humanity's ancestral habitat. She spent her entire life restoring river ecosystems, but invention of time travel has stalled lately Min's long-term restoration projects. When she gets the opportunity to take a team to 2000 BC to survey the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, she jumps at the chance to uncover the secrets of the shadowy think tank that controls time travel.
I'm going to read from a scene that is quite late in the book, but it's not really a spoiler because I don't think it'll be a surprise to anyone that a small team doing a really hard job in the past with almost no resources is going to get into some big fights. Fabian's expression was murderous, brow contracted, jaw muscles bulging. Min needed to talk him down, say something, anything. Kiki's been playing with her hormonal mix. Min lied, voice silky. If she doesn't calm down, Hamid will lock her biome. You can keep your research assistant, he said, and stalked into the tent. Min raised her hands to her throat. Her pulse hammered through her jugular, a few thin layers of muscle and connective tissue below her skin. She dialed her mood down, way down. Time. They still had time. She clung to the side of the peach, using 4 legs to stow the samples while keeping the countdown at the top of her visual field. When she was done, 16 minutes were left on the clock. Hamid and Kiki were walking slowly toward camp, talking. He was on horseback. Of course, he would keep the animal around for as long as possible. Fabian was in the tent. He probably needed more time to cool down. The skip was too small for fighting. 16 minutes was enough time for a final look at the river. It might be her last chance. If Fabian grounded them for the rest of the project, she wouldn't blame him. The sun was a thin neon fingernail reaching over the indigo hills. A deer splayed its spindly legs and stooped to drink from the river. The pool's surface was smooth, but the 6 mammals she'd spotted earlier were on the move, their data points headed toward the shallows. Their physiology data was showing some odd numbers, probably just a glitch caused by the sediment load. Min dropped to her belly 10 meters from the river. Aquatic mammals had excellent eyesight, and she didn't want to risk scaring them off. She held her breath. There, a round head and a broad back appeared, rippling the dark water as it wriggled toward the bank. It crawled out of the river. Min could barely make sense of what she was seeing. Long limbs, supple skin, lighter in the middle of the body and darker at the ends. An unknown species, but how could that be? It was the size of a human. It was a human.
Everybody a bit of a flavor of the kinds of worlds and the complexity that our panelists have created, and I want to dig into some of their thoughts on world building. The first question I wanted to ask is related to world building and economics. So one of the most powerful elements to change anything in world building is through the economy. You turn the dial and suddenly society becomes very, very different. And yet in some ways the things that have value are valuable because society just arbitrarily agrees this is going to be of value. What of the cultures in your worlds agreed is valuable, and what does that say about them? And do any of these economic changes say anything about us? Does anybody want to start?
I can jump right in on that one if you like. In my world, what is valuable is human time. And we already value that. Google is valuable because we use it. And we use it for free. And if we didn't use it, if we didn't put our eyeballs on it, it wouldn't have any value at all. So we already recognize that human time is valuable. What drives me crazy is that only certain types of human time is accounted as valuable. For example, if I'm a parent and I put my kid in front of YouTube and play Baby Shark, right? That value, eventually, all of those, that value gets accrued to YouTube, it gets accrued to the advertisers who play the advert before we see Baby Shark, and it accrues to, I hope, the people who made Baby Shark. God, like, let them, please, give them money, because it's adorable. But, and that eventually accrues to a national GDP, right? But the thousands and thousands of human hours that parents put into raising those children is never accounted anywhere, and that drives me nuts. And economists will say, oh, well, we don't have to, in economics, we don't have to account for everything. Like, it's not supposed to account for everything. Well, who says that, right? Like, you account for what you think is valuable. So I've worked my entire life in professional services where I work for businesses where the only thing that we can charge money for is human expertise. And I think that that is the most important thing in the world. So this is the economic basis of my world, is human billable hours, human time.
Reactions?
I loved it. When I was reading, I've read both of your works, and I was reading this, I was blown away by the idea that we could just cut out the middleman of like some sort of like physical currency and just use the thing that we all have a very finite amount of, and how highly we value it. I loved the idea, and it blew my mind open as far as like, no, you could do that, and every hour is kind of equally valuable. It's just that our systems on Earth are not necessarily set up to show that to the public and to allow everyone to like, consider that when they're making choices about how they spend their time. So yeah, I thought it was a really cool way of blowing that open and kind of putting the material currency aside for something a little bit more universal.
I love this topic of economics in speculative fiction and in fantasy worlds in particular. When I was growing up, I read all the classics of fantasy. Lord of the Rings, Narnia, Prydain, all of those. And then I grew up and went into a degree in business and then went on to get an MBA. So I was so steeped in learning about economics and about business and thought, all these fantasy worlds that I loved as a kid didn't really go into how you pay for stuff. Are these orcs compensated? There's a union. Yeah, like, is there an orc union? Like, how do you buy something in Narnia? So, so when I started writing fantasy, I couldn't get away from the fact that, I want in my fantasy world to evoke as much verisimilitude as possible. I want people to feel like they could get on an airplane and go to John Loon and walk down the street and go sit in the Twice Lucky restaurant and order the crispy squid there. And for me, that meant that there had to be economic underpinnings to this fantasy world that felt as real as the ones we have in our world. So in the Greenbone Saga, I really explored this idea of this magic substance. There's only one speculative element in this trilogy, and that is this magic jade. But it is treated almost science fictionally because it is mined from the earth, and it is processed, and it is cut up, and it is produced, and it has spiritual value, it has cultural value, but it is also exported because there are other countries in the world that want this magic substance. Of course they do. And so magic, this magic substance in this fantasy world, is as subject to the laws of economics and supply and demand as anything else. And because of that, magic is it's a national resource, and it is also a source of social conflict. And that's something that I think is an area where we as speculative fiction writers can really hold a mirror up to the world, because we're introducing a speculative element in order to make those divisions in our own world, the conflicts in our own world, more stark. And so, magic, in this case, the magic jade, of course it's going to cause social frictions. It's going to cause international trade disputes. There's going to be a black market. There are going to be people who want to smuggle it. It's going to determine the social status of people in that society. So I love the idea of using speculative fiction to really hone in and expose economic issues, and in so doing, expose some of the social issues that we have in our own world.
Yeah, and also not to help people realize that there are other perfectly working methods that existed before our current methods, and that there are still methods out there that are just not on Turtle Island, on the North American continent, that are in use now. And here, protagonist comes from a place where they largely work on an economy of reciprocity and goodwill, as opposed to any sort of physical currency. I read in an essay, maybe a Rebecca Solnit essay somewhere, about how that used to be, how a lot of things got done. It was basically indebtedness in communities that were smaller and more isolated. You'd do something for someone, and it would not be repaid immediately, because the intention was, one day when I need help, I'm going to go to you, and you have this, you owe me this, and you just kind of keep doing this back and forth. And this is how people got food during hard times. This is how people were able to house relatives who came from the next town over. It's kind of how everything got done. And I don't really know how it disappeared or why, but we don't really do that much anymore, except for possibly in our friend groups. We kind of have an obsession with making sure everything is squared off right now. It's a very transactional thing, right? It's like, oh, you did this for me, here, let me pay you back the $5 for that coffee immediately, as opposed to, oh, I'll get you back at some point. And so in this, I wanted to have someone who came from that, because I thought it was a very interesting way of seeing the world, of kind of being indebted to your mentors, to your friends, to these random people who do acts of goodwill because they also come from communities that are based on that system, and holding all of that kind of responsibility in the back of your mind of how am I going to repay all this eventually in a way that's useful to these people. I thought that human element of what we value is really cool to explore.
And it's not simple.
No, it's a very complicated system.
It sounds, it's simple, but it's so not. And it wouldn't be the same from culture to culture, even though it's basically the same.
What you value is different. If I give you a pig here, do I get 2 goats back? Do I get a brother-in-law? What am I getting?
And when do you pay it back? And when is appropriate? And how do you acknowledge the fact that you're in debt to someone, or that someone's in debt to you? It's fascinating, and this is the basis of human culture, right? That's what we owe to each other is something that is still with us and always has been with us. It's fascinating.
I love this panel. Let's talk about setting for a second. Setting is a literary element at the disposal of all authors, and I often conceive of world building as an extreme use of setting. All three of you have written you could have written stories set in Moose Jaw, but you didn't. Can we talk about an extreme setting as a literary tool? as speculative fiction writers, what can you do with setting in terms of theme and symbolism and character? And if examples will help the audience follow your thinking, please don't be shy about using examples from your own work or the movie Spaceballs.
Extra points with the mom.
That's right.
I can give it a start, yeah, because when I hear, I'm always talking about how the land informs the lore when you are doing world building of any kind. Like, I love to literally build from the ground up, because that's going to inform so much of the personality of a society, whether it's harsh, whether it's very abundant, and so on, and so I build from there. And so when I get to personify my settings, I love that stuff. I try to make all my settings characters. So with this, there's a hefty section in the back where we do go on quite a literal underworld journey into a big section of caves and caverns and this old monastery that's been there for hundreds of years. And it serves very much the purpose of going on like a catabasis of the mind, as well as actually like journeying through this cave system looking for things. Like, you're on a treasure hunt, but you haven't been told what you're looking for. You go, oh, you'll know when you find it, which is so aggravating to the main character and also to you, because you're sitting there like, could you just give me one straight answer, please? But no, that's the point, just searching around. And so having the actual physical setting, the very extreme setting of being like, there's no light, it's underground, you have to get used to being in darkness, and using darkness metaphorically as a place of transformation and refinement through search, and the way that you watch him change over time and sort of move through his failings and his shortcomings as he's physically moving through the space, and the obstacles that it presents and the stories that it offers, was a lot of fun to write down and then to like plan out on my map of things that I had to get through towards the end of the book.
Yeah, I love the element of mythology and history that comes into creating a speculative fiction setting, as you mentioned. One of my goals with the Greenbelt Saga was that I wanted to create a place that felt like a character in its own right. And I think some, when you read a book that is set in a really vivid place, and oftentimes, authors who write contemporary fiction do this very well. They evoke New York or London at a certain time, and I kind of wanted to accomplish that, but in a speculative fiction context. And I faced this sort of unique challenge because I was working in a secondary world, and I wanted to create something that was clearly a modern era East Asian metropolis, but was not specifically any East Asian metropolis that exists in our own world, because it wouldn't be. It is on an island with magic jade, and so therefore the entire history of that place would be completely different. The culture would be different. There would be so many things about that place that were informed by the fact that they have this thing that no one else in the world has, and it would have its own cultural traditions and values and all that. So I'm a world building junkie, and can really, I've written a number of books in like 3 completely different worlds. And I think a lot, for me, one of the things that I think about when I'm creating setting is that specific is more powerful than vague. So if you're writing and you write, the car drove down the road, you might think, oh, well, everyone knows what a car is and it's driving down the road. But that's not as specific as, I urged my 2000 Honda Civic down the I-5 freeway, because then you know something about that character, who's the person driving the car. They probably are not very well off. They're driving a very old practical car, and they're somewhere on the west coast of the United States, for example. So in that same way, when I'm creating the fantasy world, I'm trying to evoke that same level of specificity, and that means things like cultural idioms, how do people greet each other, the brand names of the cars in this fantasy world, and all those little things help create that setting. And so I had to create that specificity, but never rely on words like udon or dim sum or ramen, because that would be too specific to something in our world. So that's sort of, I think, the joy of playing in the speculative fiction space is you get to do all this world building, but you're always making these deliberate decisions about how do I make this place feel more real, but yet also not be like filing off the serial numbers of something else.
I do that by thinking a lot about toilets,
Where do they go?
Where do they go?
That surprised me.
I'm a bit obsessed with civic infrastructure and about the idea of self-contained habitats and how do you deal with human waste and how, because the only reason why we can make a fire out there and burn it and not worry about the smoke going out into the atmosphere is that the ecosystem deals with it for us. And this is something humans have been able to rely on for a really long time, and we're starting to realize that we can't rely on that anymore, and that we can't just willy-nilly expect to throw pollutants out into the atmosphere and not worry about what's going to happen to them. So I get a bit obsessed with self-contained habitats. So one of my stories from a couple of years ago is called We Who Live in the Heart, and it's about a bunch of antisocial people who have decided that instead of living in the very comfortable yet overcrowded underground habitats on their home planet, they are going to, they have colonized basically these huge jellyfish / space whales that are in the atmosphere. And they have to worry about things like how much mass load can we put in these sinuses of these space whales. They have to worry about where does the space whale go and why, and how do we get water, and how do we get power, and et cetera, et cetera. And there's a fantastic opportunities for conflict on a really, really like basic human scale when you do that, and I really like that one.
Coming back to your words and trying to find words that evoke certain things without necessarily being a one-to-one ratio. I love playing with language when it comes to world building of any kind, and that doesn't necessarily mean making up a language, although I do love doing that as well. It means, like you say, with idioms and phrases and taking known language that we have and parse in a certain way and then just flipping it on its head so that it means something different. And it's really fun when you both do this beautifully, when you set things up early in your works as like, here's a little bit of exposition about this term. I'm going to use whispering someone's name as an example. Early on in the very first of the Greenbone saga, there's this term, whispering someone's name, that gets explained as basically assassinating somebody. And you go, okay, well that's a term, I now know that term. And you go like 150 pages or something like that, not really hearing it again until later on, during a big moment, someone comes up to somebody else and goes, this just happened, so-and-so just had their name whispered, and you freak out because you know what that means. You've been brought into the world in such a way that you can speak their language. And so when you hear it, you have that emotional reaction that you would as if you were native to this place. And that's always a lot of fun to do, is to try and build those and make them organic so that the reader is pulled in enough that they react as if they've known that term all their life.
I think you can do that a lot with mythology as well, where like, if you think about a lot of the idioms are our own language that are just kind of based on history and mythology that someone in another culture would not understand. You can kind of bring those, I think so much of speculative fiction is like introducing mysteries and then answering them later. So what's great about, I think, speculative fiction readers is that they've been trained to be patient.
Yes.
Right, like
the social contract is there.
Yeah. So it's like but you can't give them too many mysteries because you'll lose them. It's like you kind of have to there's a certain number of parking slots for mysteries that they get hold in their brain. But if you introduce, like, let's say a myth or like something about the history of this place, and then you continue with your story, and then later on, that comes back in like a resonant way and informs the story. Those are sort of like narrative
little victories.
Little victories. It's like a fantasy author.
We're nerding out. I love the parking space idea, although I'm disappointed that nobody brought up combing the desert as a metaphor from Spaceballs.
So sorry.
Yes, you can save it for the next question. Let's talk about partnership with the reader. So when you use an extreme setting, it's not just more work for you, the writer. It's been said that the reader is the final writer and interpreter of any literary work. Readers take your words, and then in their minds they design the sets, the costumes, the actors, they put up the lighting, they do the special effects. And we on this panel have all been readers of highly built literary worlds where we've been the ones taking the words and making the sets and costumes. What's your experience as a reader in those situations, and why are you coming to that experience?
Kurt Vonnegut's book Jailbird has several scenes set in a harp warehouse or a harp showroom at the top of a New York skyscraper. And I was absolutely certain that I had seen that I had been there years later when somebody mentioned that. And I was sure that there had been a movie of it because it was so clear in my mind. And this is the wonderful thing, is it's such a wonderful image to have. We all know what the top of a skyscraper looks like. We all know what floor-to-ceiling windows are. We've all seen such a setting in the movies before, but we've never seen harps in it. And it's so simple, and it's so beautiful, and it's so visually evocative that just carries with me my entire life. I'll never forget the harps in the skyscraper.
I go the opposite way. I love to be crushed by a new place. Like, I love lush stuff. If anyone's ever heard of Sofia Staar, yeah, thank you, exactly. She's a goddess, and she wrote this wonderful novel called A Stranger in Alondria. And among just being an amazing novelist, Sofia Staar is also really good at writing metafiction, like little clips of poems and sagas and songs that are set in the world. And they feel just as organic and like they've been there for hundreds or thousands of years as the characters are kind of interacting with them. And I love that stuff because it feels so full. You know, it feels like you've walked into something that's been there since before your ancestors were even walking the earth. And it's just been here this whole time waiting for you to open it up and dive in. So I throw that book at as many people as I can because it's so lush, it's so descriptive, and it's so bizarre in its own way. Like there's no hand-holding. It's all just like, here it is, this is the kind of food. There was a glossary in a different book that she wrote, but this first one, no glossary. Even though there's a lot of Alondrian language, you just gotta roll with it and assume that over time you will be ingrained into this place.
Does she hook it into things we already know, or is she giving it to whole cloth? There's a lot of things like musical instruments or a lot of mythology. Again, a lot of gods are all over the place. But you get it through, I mean, I guess this is the utility of a protagonist who's traveling from a different land. Is you do get someone who's the stranger in Alondria. He's come there and he's learning about this, and he comes in thinking that he knows so much about this because he had a tutor on his island who taught him the language and so on, and then he comes and realizes, oh, you know nothing. You know nothing about this place or its people, and he has to kind of be knocked down a little bit and have his hubris shown to him. And so you learn with him, but you're confused from the beginning. So like at least you're like, oh, now we're on this journey together. Right, because he's confused too. And yeah, that's great.
Oh gosh, I think the appeal to me oftentimes of speculative fiction is is an immersive experience, like something that feels like, oh, you could just sink into this, and it doesn't feel like it's a story so much as like a thing that could hold many stories. I'm trying to think of an example, but I'll go to one from my teens. I remember when I first read Dune, and it wasn't even like a character doing a thing, but it was just the idea that you could construct this whole world, this entire culture, you know, the flora, the fauna, the subcultures within it, to the level of detail of that. I think that's kind of where sort of the world building bug and the speculative kind of got its hooks in.
But you have to really trust the writer to be able to put up with that, or it just feels like they're wanking, right?
Yes.
There's a line to walk between literally walking someone through it on a conveyor belt and they can't go off and explore, and then just kind of dropping them in a lake and going, have fun.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is the thing. I think we demand, as speculative fiction writers, we demand more trust from our readers. Mm-hmm. Because if you start a novel and you say, okay, it was 1995 in Toronto, a lot of people in this room are going to be like, okay, I got it. But for a speculative fiction reader to be like, I have no idea what's going on, but I'm still going to invest my time and energy into following this writer because I trust that it will all become clear and that they will take me where I need to go and show me incredible things along the way. It's an incredible amount of trust to ask.
How do you build that trust?
human element to it.
Wow, that is very, like, we are all like, our career minds are all like, yes, how do we?
As far as writing the actual story goes, I think that there are certain human elements, or I'm going to say emotional elements, because not every character is humanoid, but there's certain emotional elements that transcend even the most bizarre settings. People still feel love and joy and anger and fear and envy and all these things. And then even emotional landscapes can be changed and made very alien to us, but there's still that connection of reacting to what's going on. And at very least, you can take your cue from the people in the book who are reacting to something that you maybe have no idea what that is. Be like, okay, well, they're afraid of that, so I'm going to just go with them, and then eventually maybe this will be made clear.
Yeah,
I think that eventually, and then when you're proven that your suspicions are correct, like, okay, and then you kind of daisy chains like that,
I think at the end, all speculative stories, regardless of what time period, weird fantasy world, future planet they're on, are human stories. And so that's our in, is our essential humanity, is whoever, this is the character you put in front of the reader, is this is your guide, this is your in. And you can be held curious by what's going on in this world, by the setting and by the plot, but you're compelled by the people.
That makes sense.
Excellent. Okay, still nobody used combing the desert yet. But let's talk about intentionality and originality as our last question. So there's a big gravitational pull in the Western tradition of science fiction, the pulps, and fantasy, medieval knights and castles. As new readers, going back to when we were all 12 and stuff, we kind of accepted everything as fresh. But once you've read very widely, tropes and elements shift from being cool to sort of being cliche, because we've seen them so many times. Could you talk about some fantastical or science fictional elements that were cool to you at one point, and now you want something different? And after you've answered, I'd love to talk about how each of you three, as artists, intentionally reach for something different and original.
So I'll start, because for me, that I've seen enough of it and I want to do something different thing is the chosen one trope. There's so much of it in all the fantasy fiction that I read before, and often the chosen one trope in this kind of medieval bloodline focused, noble kings and lords, medieval European milieu. And I really have never, now that I'm writing, I never want to kind of lean on that trope, because I think it's so antithetical to so many of the things that we aspire to as a society. And so when I wrote the Greenbone Saga, there were a few things that I did very intentionally. One was I wanted to write I didn't go about saying I want to not do anything medieval, but the Greenbone Saga sort of naturally was a modern era fantasy. And the magic element of that has for a long, long time been exclusive to a certain group of people. But now there's this drug that's being developed so that people who don't have the genetic predisposition to be able to use this magic are able to use it. And of course that upends so much of that society, and there's that whole conflict between tradition and the pull of modernity and how society is changing because of this drug. Because of course that is what would happen if there was a magic thing. Someone in a military lab would figure out how to make a drug so more people could use it. And so that's kind of that's what I wanted to challenge, was like, yes, there was this past where there was like this bloodline nobility, and in a way you could have very well seen kind of a chosen one story happening in this world hundreds of years ago. But that's not the world we live in now, and there's technology, and there's globalization, and there's international trade, and there's all these things that are changing that world. So so I wanted to, in many ways, kind of like acknowledge some of those tropes and then subvert them as well.
I I think also the thing about the chosen one narrative is it doesn't do any favors to your protagonist because it removes agency from them. It's like you got this. You didn't ask for it and you didn't choose it. You're just kind of gonna go along with it. Main character Renoa from this subverts that very quickly and clumsily when he just asks if he can do something, if he can go on this journey, and his mentor says yes, but it has nothing to do with anything good that he's done. It's just sort of on the whim of this person, like you seem fine, and the person who's sitting beside him immediately slams his hands down like, you told me no! Why not? He's like, well, because you feel entitled to it. You think that you deserve it, and this person just has nowhere to go. So I'm going to arbitrarily choose this one because the journey will change whoever takes it. It's not that either one of you is special. I'm just more interested in this person, which I know it's appalling, but it happens. So yeah, I always love watching things happen organically from people's decisions and then the consequences that come from those decisions. As far as tropes and things like that I, as a child, I appreciated, and now I'm trying to do other things. Strong women in fantasy. When I was a small child, I loved seeing those because there were so few of them, and now they're everywhere, but I'd love to see us branch out into just women and non-binary folks and just people who are being people, and some of them are allowed to be dicks. And they're not villainized, and some of them are villains, and that's fine, and some of them are amoral, or just like, you just don't appreciate their sense of humor, or whatever it is. Like, the people that have been marginalized for so long don't have to be acting as representatives for their entire party.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's nice.
Yeah.
And of course, like, the answer to that is just add more of them.
Oh, I love that entire rant about how Black Panther is a more feminist movie than Wonder Woman. Because Wonder Woman, you know, is still the like exceptional badass woman who's as muscly as the men. And Black Panther is, look at all the women who have these variety of roles, the matriarch and the scientist and the warrior. That's awesome. One of the characters in Jade was a relatively minor character in Jade City, and she suddenly has this like fan group because she's the like kind of the she's the wife and mother traditional character, and so she's still sort of very traditionally feminine, but still plays an important role. And I think that sort of like, let's just represent the variety of awesome women. Yeah. The whole plethora of awesome women, as opposed to the one exceptional
the thing
one.
with the pedestal.
Yeah.
Exactly, yeah. And then queerness as well. As a queer author, and I think all three of these books are explicitly queer in one way or another, which is great. I love to see more queerness in spec fic, and it is coming out just in droves now, which is so exciting. But when I was younger, I didn't see any of that. As a queer individual, that kind of sucked. And then when I came into my teens and early 20s, it's like, oh no, it's there now. It always has been. It's just been kind of pushed in a drawer, but now it's being celebrated. It's winning awards, and the Lammys are here.
And also just casual. Like, now you can just have a character who is queer, and they're not like...
But that's your whole storyline, right?
Right, it's not like that is their thing, like they just are, and you know, that, yeah, for sure.
I'm super sick of dystopias. So, super duper. I have a rant on Clark's World about dystopias. So if you want to know more about how much I hate them, check that out. But one of the things is, decades of reading dystopias has taught us nothing. It's taught us nothing about how dystopias are with us right now. How indigenous people in North America have lived through a dystopia for the past 500 fucking years. We have, even though we have so many dystopias, we don't know a damn thing about them. We think that it's still possible for people to write and read dystopias and think of them as really simple things that are fictional. They're not. I wrote this book specifically against that, and people still think it's a dystopia, even though it's a post-scarcity society where nobody dies of want, and everyone has nutritious food and all the education they could possibly want, and can go anywhere in the world that they want. Just because I call some of the habitats that humans live in hells because they're underground, people think, well, that means they're terrible, right? Well, did you read the book? Because they're pretty fucking rocking. They're great.
Yeah, I think that is sort of risk of writing any futuristic science fiction is like when you're, as a science fiction author, if you try to present a future that feels nuanced, that has these positive elements, but also has these negative elements, people automatically say like, oh, it's a dystopia. But when you're like, wait, I'm kind of just trying to reflect the same mix of good and bad that we have now.
Is it a dystopia because some people are unhappy?
Right. Right? And it's a book! And when I was writing YA, this was especially bad, because everything in YA science fiction is a dystopia!
They're preparing the young ones.
Right. But dystopia is a point of view.
Yes.
Where, depending on where you are viewing society, you are not in a dystopia. The Hunger Games, if you're in the capital, is really great!
Yeah, no dystopia for them.
So we have time for maybe 1 or 2 questions, if anybody has questions. If not, I can dig into combing the desert. Any questions? Okay, go ahead, and I may repeat it to the audience to make sure everybody gets it through the speaker. So the question is, how has food been incorporated into the world building you've done?
Please talk about crispy squid balls.
Food, I love food. So yes, food figures in my novels. Food, so much of our social interaction is over food, right? If you're going to meet up with your friend, oh, let's meet for breakfast, let's meet for coffee, family gatherings, over Thanksgiving. So much of food is social. So I think if I read a fantasy world and there's no mention of the food, I am suspicious. Because there has to be how we share food, how we prepare it and enjoy it together says a lot about that society. There's a reason why the story starts in a restaurant and ends in a restaurant. So I also spent an inordinate amount of time Googling foods to describe the different meals that the characters are having. It's also a way of showing different cultures. So if you have characters that are enjoying a meal in one culture and that experience is different in another culture, that helps too, as well. So I think in layers when I'm doing world building, and food is definitely one of the layers, there's other layers as well that I think don't get recognized as enough when you're building fantasy worlds, and those include things like sports. Sports are a huge part of our world, and they should be in fantasy worlds. Entertainment and pop culture. What are people watching? What are they spending their time doing? So those sort of, all those layers are things that I'm thinking about, even if they're not part of the main story, they are, they're giving texture to the story. So the food is part of that. It's part of the texture of it, and also so much of the cultural nuance of it. Because in the first scene, I was like, okay, well, I need to set up like what kind of world this is. So and I was doing that with, and technology level too. So I was doing that with this one scene at the restaurant, because in the restaurant I could describe kind of the weather outside and how the food that was being eaten and the phonograph that's playing in the corner, and kind of do all that scene setting in one place.
Food also tells you really quickly how good your trade alliances are. Because if you're in a place that is isolated or doesn't have particularly robust trade networks, then you're going to be pretty limited as far as what grows indigenous to your area. So I know an inordinate amount about Sri Lankan agriculture because I was Googling garden zones and things like what could possibly grow here. And how would they cultivate it? And then you think about practical things okay, it's 100 pounds of this. How are you going to transport it this way? You're not going to just put it on your back. So there's practical things like that to think about where the food comes from, and then how it's prepared as well. That's the part that I like to think about, especially in traveling stories where you are, navigating across places and you have to carry supplies with you sometimes. It's all right, what can you afford to make? What's going to keep? what's going to go bad on you instantly, what can you find on the way, and who's going to be providing it to you. So that's a really fun thing too, to weave it in of like, I guess, convenience, the convenience of what you're eating and where it's coming from. And then, yeah, not in this book, the one that I'm writing now, there's a lot of very specific, like almost national dishes, like there's a lot of delicacies, and it's in a bunch of regions that are very closed off from each other due to political reasons. And at one point, we stay in one of these regions long enough that the season changes, and more than anything, that is marked by the fact that all the dishes are different now, because everything that was in season is now gone, we've used it up, and now we're using the new crops of things. And so more than anything, that for the protagonist, that marks like, oh, this, I thought that it looked like this, but I was just seeing it in wintertime, and now it is in springtime, and a different crop has come in, and this place has an ecosystem that I didn't consider just passing through. So that's a lot of fun too, is seeing the variety of things that come through organically through the growth zones of the place.
You can also use food to show character. So I have a scene in Who Likes What and Who's Brave.
Who has allergies?
There's a scene in my book where my team of scientists are on a layover and they had stopped in Iceland, and they decide to take Kiki, who has never been anywhere before, who is 23 years old, and who's basically never eaten anything that wasn't artificially, molecularly printed. Take her for fresh fish, for deep fried smelts. And yeah, exactly, right? So eyes, fins, head, everything. So it kind of shows, she dives right into it, and it's yum yum, and she's, never tasted anything so delicious. But it shows how brave she is, and about how she's willing to dive into new things and to not be scared.
Yeah, because it's a fundamental part, like you build yourself out of food. So there's a metaphor in there too of like the classic, you are what you eat, but you are quite literally and molecularly. So to have somebody be able to kind of take all that experience in, that does show like a very bold spirit.
So we're at 57 minutes. So I would like to say that on behalf of Word on the Street, I'd like to thank you all for attending Imagination Architects. If you'd like to see some of the worlds we've discussed, the four of us will be at the back, and we can sign any books you like. I'm going to hand it back to Leah in a second for announcements of more presentations by great writers like Evan Winter and Nicholas Eames. And I would also like to ask you to give a wonderful round of applause to our excellent, excellent panelists.